Hello everybody, I would like to welcome you to the fourth video in the pre-algebra playlist, and in this video we will go over multiplying integers. So let's get started. Now, one of the most basic definitions of multiplication is that it can be seen as the repetition of addition. So what do I mean by this definition? Well, I'll go over it in more detail when we go over the examples near the end of the video. But for now, what I would like to do is I would like to go over some different types of notations that are common with the multiplication area of mathematics. Now, one of the most common notations for multiplication is the common x. The next one is simply a dot, and the next one is a parenthesis. Now, I'll write these notations down in more detail with examples. So here's my first notation example. If I have some number 1 and I want to say that I'm multiplying that number with another number, one way I can write that is by putting an x in between those two numbers, such as this. When you're just getting started with multiplication, this symbol of x to denote multiplication is the most common notation. But later on, when you get to deal with variables and many other unknowns, the x is denoted generally for a variable and not the multiplication symbol. So basically, later on in your mathematical careers, you probably will stop writing the x to symbolize multiplication and move on to the other two types of notations, such as the dot or the parentheses. Here is the second common notation for multiplication. Now, if I want to say the same thing as I did in number 1 over here, which is that I'm multiplying some number by another number, instead of writing an x, I can simply write a little dot in the middle, such as this over here. Fortunately, the dot does not really get confused with other variables or anything like that later on in mathematics, so it is perfectly logical for you to write a dot as the multiplication symbol whenever you please. Now let's go over the third one. In this third sign, what I will do is that I will not write an x or a dot. What I will do is that I will simply put a bracket, such as this, or parentheses over here, around any one or even two of the numbers. So if I want to say number 1 times number 2, I can write it like this over here, like this over here, or even like this over here. Now, before we go into the examples with multiplication, I would like to go over the things that we have done so far with addition and subtraction. I would like to go over the rules for the signs of the answer for multiplication. So here are 3 rules that tell you what the sign of the answer will be when you're multiplying two numbers together. The first rule tells me that if I'm multiplying together two positive numbers, the sign of the answer will always be a positive. The second rule tells me that if I have two negative numbers that I'm multiplying together, the answer again will always be positive. And the third rule tells me that if I am multiplying two numbers together, of which one is a positive and the other is a negative, my answer will always be a negative. Now, before we jump into the examples portion of this video, I would just like to clarify that many times teachers and even parents or anybody else will classify the terminology of answers when dealing with multiplication as products. So when they're asking you to find the answer of, let's say, what is 5 times 6, instead of just asking you to find the answer, they'll ask you to find the product of 5 times 6. So basically, whenever you hear the word answer in relation to multiplication, think about it as product. So now that you understand just a few of the common notations in relation to multiplication, such as the x, the dot, and the parentheses, and you understand the rules for the sign of that product, it is time for us to move on to the examples portion of this video. So let's start us off with an easy example. In this example, we will find the answer to what 3 times 5 is equal to. For the purposes of this video, though there are many different ways of writing 3 times 5, I will stick to the common x notation for multiplication. In the beginning of the video, I said that multiplication can be thought of as a repetition of addition. What I mean by this is that if you have something like 3 times 5, you can think about it as adding 5 to itself 3 times. Or you can think about it as 3 being added to itself 5 times. Either way, you will get the same answer of 15. Let's do another example. Let's say you want to find what 4 times 6 is equal to. Again, you can think about multiplication as a repetition of addition and add 4 to itself 6 times. Or add 6 to itself 4 times. Either way, you will get the same answer of 24. Now let's do an example involving a negative. Now let's say I have something like negative 3 times 7. One of the best ways to deal with negative integers when it comes to multiplication is kinda really just to ignore them. What I mean by that is that the first thing you do is that you take the absolute value of the negative integer to give you a positive number. In this case, the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. And since 7 is already a positive number, what you can do now is that you can multiply the absolute value of negative 3 with 7 to give you 3 times 7. What you do now is that you find the answer of the two positive numbers that are being multiplied together, 3 and 7. So you can do this by adding 3 to itself 7 times or adding 7 to itself 3 times. Either way, you get the same answer of 21. Once you've figured out the answer of the positive integers that are being multiplied together, you refer back to our rules of the sign of the product. And you know that when you multiply a negative number with a positive number, the sign of the product will always be a negative. So you simply put a negative sign in front of the answer. In this case, now your answer is negative 21. Let's do a couple more examples with a negative multiplication. Let's say you have something like 5 times negative 4. You realize that there's a negative in the question. So what you can do first of all is take the absolute value of the negative number to give you a positive number. In this case, the absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4. Now you can multiply the absolute value, which is a positive number, with the 5 to give you 5 times 4. By now you should be getting the hang of multiplication and realize that the answer to 5 times 4 is equal to 20. All you need to do now is deal with the sign of the product. Referring back to our rules again, you know that when you multiply a positive number, such as the 5 over here, and a negative number together, such as this negative 4 over here, you will always get a negative number. So in this case, all you need to do is just add a little negative to the answer. And so you get your final answer of negative 20. Let's do one more example. Let's say I want to find the product of negative 3 times negative 8. I could take the absolute values of negative 3 and negative 8 individually, multiply the positive numbers together, and then just deal with the sign referring to our product sign rules. But I can just refer to the rules right now and realize that when I multiply two negative numbers together, in this case negative 3 and negative 8, I will always get a positive number. So what I can do is that I can simply find the product of 3 times 8, which will give me 24, and know that this is my final answer because my sign of the product will always be a positive when I'm multiplying two negative numbers together. Now let's do a couple more sort of harder examples relating to multiplication. Let's say I want to find out what 6 times 3 times negative 3 is. One of the ways I can write this problem is in this way, or in this way, and a couple more different ways. But the way in which you write down the question doesn't really matter because the answer will still be the same. So you might be wondering how you would approach such a problem. Because now, instead of having just two integers that are being multiplied together, you have three integers that are being multiplied together. And really the method is the same. You keep on multiplying from the left to the right. So what I can do is that I can break up this problem into two different parts. In the first part, I'll find the answer to 6 times 3, which gives me 18. and then I'll multiply the 18 together with -3 to give me my final answer. Now, once you take the absolute value of the -3 over here, the question turns into what is 18 times 3? Once you use a calculator, or now that you have just become really good at multiplication, you figure out that the answer is 54. But is it 54 or is it -54? Referring back to our rules of signs of the product, you know that when I'm multiplying a positive number with a negative number, my answer will always be a negative number. So I need to put a little negative in front of the 54 to give me my final answer of -54. I think you've gotten a pretty good hang of multiplication by now. We have done 6 examples. Now, in this last part of the video, I'm going to put up 5 common multiplication tables. So basically, I'm going to put up multiplication tables of 1 to 5. And I encourage you to look for patterns within them so you can build your own multiplication tables ranging from 6 to 10 and basically onwards of more than 10. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned a lot from it. I hope you keep on working hard, and I'll see you in the next video when we cover dividing integers.